As a Christian working woman, you have many roles, from your responsibility with family and friends to community and work. How do you connect all that you do with all that you are and still have your faith shine through? It's a challenge, but you are up to it. The She Works For Him podcast is the gathering place to empower Christian working women to live out their calling at work by connecting them to God, resources, and each other through powerful faith stories from other working sisters in Christ. Welcome to She Works For Him.
You've tuned into She Works For Him, where we connect Christian working women to God, resources, and one another. I'm your host, Martha Brangenberg, here today with my co-host, Katherine Gates. And you can find out more about us at sheworksforhim.com and also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we just want to make sure that you know that we are available to you. You can DM us or whatever way you want to contact us through our website. Our resources are there for you. So make sure you're checking us out at sheworksforhim.com.
Across the business world, there is still an imbalance of men and women leaders. Women represent less than 30% of those in leadership. And as we move to the C-level, the number dips even further down to about 20%. There are many factors that contribute to the deficit of women leaders, but one important factor is insufficient mentoring and sponsorship for women where they work. It takes an intentional commitment to identify high potential women, provide a career development path for them, and prepare women for those higher levels of leadership, including the C-suite. Field Agent, a mid-sized company in Northwest Arkansas, is doing exactly that and experiencing positive results. Field Agent is a technology company that helps brands win at retail. Marc was one of the first employees at Field Agent, and prior to becoming its president and chief commercial officer, he was chief operating officer. Marc groomed Leslie Webb to take his place. Leslie started with the company as senior director of account management and took the position of COO in early 2021. We're excited to give them an opportunity to share how they are intentional about developing both the men and women on their team. Leslie and Marc, welcome to She Works For Him.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katherine.
So we're going to talk about how you both connect your faith to your work. But first, I would love for each of you to just briefly give us the highlights of how you became a Jesus follower. And Leslie, I'd love for you to start.
Sure. My story is pretty short and sweet. I was probably about 8 years old at a vacation Bible school at a tiny, tiny country church in rural Madison County, down a 2-mile dirt road. And there were these two women, Miss Carol and Miss Jewel, that came every single summer and poured into all the kids in the community that went to this little vacation Bible school close to the end of the week. And there was a bit of an altar call, if you will. And I remember vividly sitting in the pew, staring at the front, listening to the words, and I could just feel Jesus's presence. And so that was golly, this really is the time that I'm supposed to ask Jesus into my heart. So that's my story.
I think it's amazing that you remember their names, right? That's how impactful. Marc, what about you?
Well, I'll start with a name too, I guess. Brother Loy Culver of New Hope Baptist Church in a little 200-person town in Northeast Arkansas. And I still remember a message that he gave. And then I'm a fairly independent creature and guess always have been, because when I was even 9 years old, I remember praying for Christ to save me and kind of understanding what that meant at that age. And I didn't tell anybody for a while. And I remember telling my dad and stepmom one night, a couple of weeks later, and they're like, why didn't you let us know? You know, I said, well, I was waiting for a miracle or something. You said, I was supposed to feel it in my heart and I hadn't felt anything yet. So I was waiting, and they shed a little bit more light on it for me. And I still remember, but if you really talk about following Jesus, I'll tell you, the Lord really spent time working on me in college and made it clear to me what it meant to live for him instead of myself. And that's where I really felt like the gospel became real for me in my life, was in college, which is a pretty rare place at a public university to get closer to Jesus, but I was fortunate.
Wow. I'd love to hear more of that. But for right now, Marc, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what Field Agent does and how has faith played a part in the growth of your business?
Well, I think like a lot of us in life, we get to point at a lot of pioneers in this world, and I get to do the same with Field Agent. So while I help run the company now, I do so with a few of our co-founders, Henry Ho and Rick West, who I would just tell you, and I think a lot of it has to do with the theme of what I'll talk about today, maybe as we go through some of the interview, but it's the little intentional decisions along the way, I think, that make the biggest difference. And they were that way. They started a company in 2001 that they were saying, we are going to be intentional that kingdom values and outflows are going to be part of this for-profit business. So just saying that and holding to that made this a completely different place to work. So whether it's things we see today, like the way we match funds for giving to kingdom causes, giving free vacation to people to go on mission trips and funding them to do so, the meetings we have, the Bible studies we promote, the way we pour into the community, that all came from a few folks at the beginning that said, we're just going to have to make sure this looks a little different than most companies. And that carried through. And folks like me gravitated to that and were attracted to that and couldn't even explain why, and have been around for 15 years now. So that's the faith side. There's a whole business model we can talk about what we actually do, but why we do it all started with a little bit of intentionality.
That's fantastic. And so how have the Christian values influenced your approach to developing the team members?
Well, I think it opens the door differently. So not to be naive and say that everybody that works here would have the exact same faith or the same faith that I do, but they do know what the company was founded on. They do know why the word faith is the first of our 6 key values on the wall. I mean, they know that we want to do things different and with biblical values. So with that foundation, I think the kind of conversations you can have with folks, the way you can ask about their family or their kiddos in light of wanting to pray for them, the way you can, set up meetings that are voluntary to come to that include faith elements like worship and prayer, are okay because people know that we're about something a little bit different around here. So I think it's as much about the foundation being laid so that whatever you decide to do to honor God and his kingdom through your work, the foundation's there. We have that benefit as being a company that's about that, at least.
So when those values are a foundation, like you said, Marc, it's really common for your employees to know what those values are because they see them and they can identify them. So Leslie, I want to turn to you then. How have those values helped grow, with the growth that you've seen there for yourself as a team member at Field Agent?
Well, I have to go back to a little bit to my experience before I was here because I have quite a few years in the business world before my time here at Field Agent. And I worked in some very, not healthy work environments where people really didn't care much about your family, your well-being. It was more about what can you produce, and it not really the whole person. So it was very, very different coming into this environment, and this environment was really. It took Marc could tell you. We joke a little bit. Marc could tell you it took a little bit of adjusting for me, just coming out of an environment that was so different and walking into one where you really could. And you should be the same person that you are at home, at work, everywhere you go, and then that's encouraged. And so I think the just excellence is also one of our core values. That's a huge one for me. When I was just over the operations team, we talked a lot about how the theme of excellence, this chord of excellence, should run through every single thing we do, and just being able to. I think to tie in those core values truly with what people believe and encourage folks to work hard, but work to do their best and to be intentional in growing each other. Growth is another core value here. Okay. So again, I guess it goes back to the foundation that Marc talked about and the intentionality of our co-founders to really set something up that was going to be very, very different. So we're encouraged to do it. It's easy to flourish in an environment like this when you have kind of open and free reign to do your very, very best.
Oh, that's so very good. And we're going to hear a lot more about what has, those core values, how they've played out at Field Agent and in your own lives, in your own careers, and the teams that you are cultivating behind you and with you. We'll be right back with more from She Works for Him.
Did you know that God has a calling on your life? It's true. He's called you to bring Jesus to the world. For some, that may look like a pulpit or a foreign mission field, but for most of us, it looks like a construction site, a cubicle, a hospital, or a classroom. Wherever it is that you work, live, volunteer, and invest, that is your mission field. To learn more about integrating your faith into your work and retirement, check out our books, I Work for Him, She Works for Him, and I Retire for Him, by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore.
Welcome back to She Works for Him with your co-hosts Martha Brangenberg and Catherine Gates. Today we have this unique privilege of having two co-workers with a very unique story of how they have, there's just so much here about the company values and the way it has really cultivated this environment where women can be nurtured and flourish in where their giftings are. So Marc and Leslie, thank you so much for being with us today as we're sharing your story.
Leslie, you mentioned a little bit about, some of your past experience, right? It hasn't always been positive, and now you're in a place, like Martha said, where you can really flourish and thrive. But as a Christian working woman, what would you say has been just overall your biggest struggle? And then I'd love to also hear about your biggest victory.
Well, as a Christian working woman, I'm also a Christian working wife and a Christian working mother. And so thinking through the struggle throughout the career of how to balance all of those things really well, that's been an interesting challenge. And what I've learned is there's so much that depends on life stage, just the different phases that you go through. So one of those positions that I had previously, I traveled so much. And my husband and we have 3 children. At the time, we had 2. And I vividly remember one evening I had gotten home from a trip and he said, "We can't do this anymore. The kids need you. I need you. And it's not working for us." And so taking a step back and saying, okay, we've got to make a big decision here. And that resulted in a career move and a job change to do what was best and what was right for my family at the time. I think it's difficult when, especially women who choose to work, feel the pressure of all those things and they try to balance it all perfectly. You can't balance it all perfectly. You have to do the best you can, given the circumstances you're in the life phases. And then sometimes you have to adjust. So that was a big one for a struggle. And then I think the victory is very, very much along those same lines. It's learning that it's okay to adjust, that you're not going to be mom of the year every day, maybe. And maybe you're not always going to be your 100% everywhere, to give yourself a little bit of grace and then to make the adjustments as you need to do the best for you, your family, the company that you work for, all of those. So being able to give yourself some grace and make some changes.
That's so important. I think a lot of women struggle with feeling like they've got to get it all perfect. And, if we get through the day and everybody's still alive, sometimes that's a good day, right?
Yes, that's a win.
Yeah. Everybody's been fed. Everybody's got what they need. Right. So I'm sure, working in a co-ed C-suite, right? You're the only woman in the C-suite at Field Agent. You've got a few men. There must be times when there is a little bit of tension with that, some challenges that you and I talked a little bit about. Sometimes the men need that time just with the other men. So how do you guys navigate that so that you kind of respect those types of needs, but also are inclusive?
I would love to hear what Marc has to say about this first.
Sure.
No, I think it's a great question. I'll kind of indirectly answer because it made me think of a scenario I was in one time. It's not C-suite related, but it's being conscious, I think, which is a big part. I think in navigating gender complexity in the workplace, I think being conscious as a male or female leader is huge. And I wasn't for a season. I think I was kind of wrote things off as, oh, people know I'm a nice guy. I'm not meaning to offend anybody. But that's a lot different than saying, you know what, I need to be conscious of the decisions I'm making because it's actually impacting people. So the reason I say that is what it made me think of is I had a female direct report one time who I had just gotten back from lunch with a male direct report of mine who, on a whim, I was going through the office and just invited him, just him, to go have barbecue with me down the road. And we talked for a while and came back. And about a week later, she said, I want to talk to you about something. I said, please, and she said, I just wonder, would you have just invited me to go eat barbecue? And I was like, it made me think, part of me is like, yeah, I think so, but maybe not because of a male-female dynamic, or I was processing all of it. But the fact that I couldn't give a clear answer made me go, I need to be conscious about the decisions I'm making and how that's reflecting. And so in that case, she actually encouraged me and we worked through it together. And I actually decided, hey, if I'm going to do anything with a male coworker or direct report or anything like that, it better be something that I would also do directly with a female coworker, because we need to make sure that we're being fair and equal around here. And it was a learning for me. And the reason I say that to the question is because as that carries into the C-suite, luckily Leslie is a friend and a counterpart. And frankly, I don't even know how often the fact that it's male and female comes into play for our dynamic because we're all so close. But being conscious of the fact that there are, male and female dynamics that need to be considered has been huge for me. So I didn't give you a practical example of how that plays out in our office with Leslie, and I'd love to hear from her kind of how she's seen it play out, good or bad. I'm open to it, let's be honest here. But, for me, I had a couple years ago, I had to really step back and go, are you even being conscious of how you're treating men versus how you might be treating women? It was good for me.
That is so good. And Leslie, I would love to hear, you and I talked a little bit, so I'd love to hear your answer as well.
Yeah, I will. Well, Marc did hit on, I have the privilege to work with 4 very fabulous men, and they are super respectful. It's the best possible scenario. But practically, one of the things that I do, and I don't know that Marc knows this, there are times when maybe someone comes in and says, hey, do you want to go to lunch? Do you want to go to lunch? Leslie, do you want to go to lunch? And sometimes I'll just decline and just say, no, that's okay. You guys go ahead. We have a standing lunch. We go to lunch once a week all together. Great. I know that they're men and they need to talk about things that maybe they don't want me to be around. That's okay. That's fine. So I think part of that too is being okay with that. I knew when I took my plant and my air purifier into the office, it was going to make a difference anyway. The air quality's gone up, so we know that. But I try to be intentional about that as well.
That's awesome.
I love that you can just be candid, and it shows that you have a trusting relationship with each other. And that's something that just is a great example to be setting for not only us as listeners. I can imagine it's happening in your office space as well. And that opens just the door for those conversations. So thank you for sharing from your hearts. Just real quick, Leslie, what do you do as a Christian working woman to keep your iron sharp? Are you involved in a community or some sort of place outside of your work that helps you to live out your faith at your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think that goes back to life stage and where you are. Like it's changed over the course of my career. And right now it's just making sure I'm intentional and fellowshipping with some other Christian women. That's important. So that's how I do it now. Previously, it might have really been like an intentional Bible study, a community group, whatever that is.
Right.
But I think you have to, again, be able to be flexible. Make sure you are still continuing to engage and sharpen the iron, but it can look different, and it should look different, and that's also okay.
Excellent. Good. And we'll be right back with more from She Works for Him.
As women, we like to share our special finds with others. That new little shop we just discovered, or a favorite brand that is having a sale. Well, I have a special find for you. The Awaken Podcast Network is a collection of podcasts gathered onto a digital platform with you in mind. No more searching and wondering if the content is relevant. The work has already been done. Awaken Podcast Network even has smaller collections of podcasts focused on specific topics, including a collection called She Works for Him, dedicated to content for Christian working women. So go ahead, unlock God's purpose for your work, and check out awakenpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome back to She Works for Him, where we're talking to Marc, Yount, and Leslie Webb from Field Agent about how they develop women on their team, and a little bit about how their faith plays into their company's success. And so I know Field Agent is incredibly intentional about building relationships with ministry partners. Marc, could you talk a little bit about what that looks like for you guys?
Sure. Yeah. Practically, we have over the years been introduced to a lot of nonprofits, kingdom-related nonprofits and missionaries that just heard about our vision. And then you can imagine that kind of snowballs, right? So once somebody realized there's a company out there that cares and there's an audience maybe they could speak to, you get a chance to hear from the next one. And what practically it looks like is we give money to companies like that. We also match to team members who give to companies like that. We have them come in on Monday mornings for about a 30-minute session and share with the team what they're doing in the world and how God's using them, so that our team gets exposed to different things that God's doing around the world, and they get to see a bigger vision than just what we're doing inside these walls. And then we invite them, local ones, to our Christmas parties. We send out gifts at the end of the year. We do drawings and send people gift cards all over the world for things that they're doing. So we have a map downstairs on a wall that shows all the work people are doing so we can stay close. We have pictures that adorn this whole office that are from trips we've taken. So it's a lot of stuff. It's just ingrained in who we are as a company, especially for those that love taking advantage of that as an employee.
That's amazing.
I'm just curious if one of your values is reflected from that. Is that part of one of your 6?
Well, it falls into faith. The sub-brand for the word faith is hope for the future. And so hope for the future ties into us talking about global and local missions and tying that in there. And so, again, not everybody here is on that bandwagon every day, but for the folks that are, it's so powerful to have a different environment that looks beyond into what the Lord's doing in the world. We have to keep that fresh around here.
Excellent. And I was just going to ask you about the local, because I think so many people do think globally, but then to know that you as an organization are making intentionality to be impactful in your own community. Are some of those hands-on things that you're getting involved in, or is it more equipping others?
No, absolutely hands-on, and community is one of the 6 words. So that helps the local be really serious for us. And we want to have a foot here in Northwest Arkansas. It's an amazing community. It's over indexes in faith and missions, in my opinion, and church presence. Hands-on, absolutely. We just tore off some shingles and help clean up a property and tear down a barn for a local ministry called Saving Grace that helps with women who are aging out of foster care and need a place to stay. Before that, we were helping with Potter's House ministry, packing bags for Christmas. You could kind of go down the list of things for our team to be involved in there for a bigger purpose.
That's so great. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but I would love for each of you to take a moment to just share one final word of wisdom, especially as it relates to developing women on your team. And Leslie, I'd love for you to start.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing is to really seek out and be intentional about who are going to be the next women leaders in the organization. So I meet with about 3 or 4 women regularly. Sometimes it's in a mentorship capacity. Sometimes it's just kind of hanging out, being a soundboard. Sometimes it's encouraging them. And I think it's so important to be able to seek out the people who are in our business, who are business minded, and also focused on people and really have a heart for people, so we can nurture that next group of women leaders.
That's wonderful. And Marc, any final word of wisdom from you?
Well, I had one, but I'm going to replace it, honestly, because I read something yesterday from my friend Steve Graves, and I want to say it real quick. It says, God doesn't want me to flush my ambition. Instead, he wants me to redeem my ambition and harness it for good. So any men listening out there, I would love to, if you're progressing, ambition is such a good thing, but how do you harness it for good and see those around you that you can bring up with you women, people of color, people in distress situations, coworkers who don't have another opportunity or sponsor internally, to spend time with folks and help them progress because you've been ambitious. I think your ambition is worth all the more if you can pull somebody up with you. So I'd leave folks with that and challenge myself with it as well.
I love that.
A good challenge for all of us. Leslie Webb and Marc Yount from Field Agent, thank you so much for being on She Works for Him today and sharing just a little bit of insight into how God is helping you to lead your company.
Thanks for having us.
You bet.
Thank you.
You've been listening to She Works for Him with your hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Katherine Gates. We're Christian working women helping other Christian working women to live out their calling at work as she works for Him.
As Christian women, we have many roles. From daughter, sister, friend, wife, and mother to analyst, accountant, executive, or educator. Is it possible to balance our roles at work and home in a way that honors God? The answer is yes, and our new book, She Works for Him, will help show you how. Written to celebrate, encourage, and equip women in the workforce, She Works for Him discusses the diverse experiences of today's Christian working woman. Pick up a copy by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore. You've been listening to the She Works for Him podcast with your hosts, Katherine Gates, Nadia Dixon, and Martha Brangenberg. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube under She Works for Him. And to access any of the resources we mentioned on today's show, see the show notes at sheworksforhim.com. That's sheworks4him.com. This podcast was created to empower you to live out your calling at work so the world knows she works for Him.